The door that had remained locked for 3 years opened the morning after Zara Brennan buried her husband, and behind it lay a nursery neither of them had built. She stood in the narrow hallway of the staff quarters on the 8th floor of the Matthias Palace Hotel, holding a clipboard thick with inventory sheets. Protocol demanded it. Her husband had been the king's sworn steward, keeper of the court's human-facing operations, liaison between daylight commerce and the ancient authority that occupied the building's upper floors and basement vaults. 3 days ago, Victor had been stabbed in an alley near the Eastern Railway Station. The police called it robbery. The vampire court knew better but would not say why, and Zara had signed the death certificate with hands that did not shake because shaking would come later, in private, where it belonged. Now she was 6 months pregnant, swollen-footed and furious, working through Victor's personal effects because the court's codes were specific. A steward's quarters must be cleared within a week of death, all correspondence logged, all assets returned or accounted for. She had lived here for 3 years. She had tried that door a dozen times. It had always been locked, and Victor had shrugged and said it was probably electrical panels or old storage. Nothing worth bothering the maintenance staff over. The door was open now. Zara set the clipboard on the hall table and stepped inside. The room was small, perhaps 12 feet square, but it had a window. Evening light slanted through gauze curtains, catching on the mobile that hung above a wooden cot. The mobile was hand-carved, delicate birds on silver wire. The walls had been painted a soft gray-blue, and someone had stenciled stars across the ceiling in metallic gold. A lamp shaped like a crescent moon sat on a low dresser. There were shelves, already stocked with blankets and small folded clothes. A rocking chair stood in the corner, its cushion embroidered with something in a language she thought might be Hungarian but wasn't sure. She put a hand on the doorframe to steady herself. "For our child." The voice came from behind her, low and calm, and Zara turned fast enough that her vision swam. Pregnancy had done terrible things to her balance. He stood in the hallway, tall and pale and still as sculpture. Hadrian Mircea, king of the Central European court, looked exactly as he always did. White hair pulled back, white skin that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than she used to make in a year. His eyes were gray, the color of winter clouds, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to step back and hold her ground in equal measure. "You did this," Zara said. It was not a question. "I did." "When?" "Over the last 4 months. I had it finished 2 weeks ago." She looked back at the nursery, at the careful paint and the stocked shelves and the rocking chair that someone had chosen with thought. Victor never said anything. He did not know. The room was sealed until today. Why today? Hadrian's expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted, a minute settling that might have been resignation. "Because yesterday you became a widow under my protection, and the court's codes are clear. A sworn steward's family does not lose shelter or provision at his death. You are 6 months from delivering a child. You will need a nursery." Zara's throat felt tight. She had cried once, alone in the apartment after the police left, and then she had stopped because crying did not pay rent or settle debts or prepare her for single motherhood in a foreign city. She had been in Budapest for 3 years, spoke passable Hungarian, had a work visa tied to Victor's employment, and precisely no family within 1,000 miles. The baby kicked, a rolling pressure against her ribs, and she pressed a hand to her stomach. "This is too much," she said. "It is what is owed. I'm not part of the court. I'm human. You are the widow of my steward and you carry his child. That makes you part of this household." Hadrian stepped into the doorway but did not cross the threshold. "The room is yours to use or refuse, but it will remain available. I do not make gestures I do not intend to honor." He turned and walked back down the hall before she could answer, his footsteps silent on the old carpet. Zara stood in the nursery for a long time, looking at the stars on the ceiling, and then she went back to the inventory because it still needed finishing. The court occupied the top 9 floors of the Matthias Palace Hotel, a 19th-century building that loomed over the Danube with the kind of ornate grandeur that came from having too much money and a fondness for excess. The ground floors still operated as a hotel, mostly for guests who enjoyed the Gothic atmosphere and did not ask questions about the private lift or the staff who only appeared after sunset. The real business happened upstairs, in the suites and ballrooms that had been retrofitted with blackout shutters and connected by a maze of interior halls that never saw daylight. Zara had never been to the upper floors. Victor had often, but his work had mostly kept him in the ground-level offices or out in the city, managing the court's daytime interests. She knew the names, the hierarchy, the basic etiquette enough to avoid insult if she encountered someone in the hallway. Vampires were polite, formal, and very specific about respect. They did not tolerate carelessness, but they rewarded competence with a loyalty that was almost old-fashioned. Victor had loved the work. He had loved the codes, the structure, the sense that he was part of something larger and older than himself. Zara had loved Victor, so she had made peace with the strangeness. Now Victor was dead, and she was alone in a staff apartment with a finished nursery and no idea what came next. She spent the next 2 days finishing the inventory and packing Victor's clothes into boxes for donation. The court sent someone to collect his correspondence and files. A lawyer appeared, human, nervous, and explained that Victor's salary would continue for 6 months as severance, and that her residence in the apartment was secure for the same period. After that, she would need to make other arrangements. 6 months. The baby would be a month old. Zara thanked the lawyer, signed the papers, and closed the door on him with a calm she did not feel. That night she sat in the nursery's rocking chair and tried to imagine what came next. She had some savings. She could go back to London maybe, or find work in Budapest if her visa could be adjusted. She had been a translator before she met Victor, freelance work mostly, and she was good at it. She could manage. She had to manage. The baby kicked again, and Zara rested her head against the chair's high back and closed her eyes. Hadrian Mircea found her there an hour later. She did not hear him approach. They moved too quietly for that, but she felt the change in the air, the way the silence became occupied, and when she opened her eyes, he was standing in the nursery doorway, watching her. "I knocked," he said. "You did not answer." "Sorry, I was thinking about what comes next." It was not a question, and Zara did not pretend otherwise. "Yes." He stepped into the room, slow and deliberate, and folded himself into a crouch beside the rocking chair so that his eyes were level with hers. It was such an unexpected gesture, so careful, so human in its consideration that Zara forgot to be nervous. "I have a proposal," Hadrian said. "I'm listening." Victor's death was not random. He was killed because he knew something about a shipment that should not have reached the city, and he was moving to intercept it. The threat is not resolved, and it touches the court's internal structure. I cannot discuss the details, but I can tell you this. You are safer here than you would be elsewhere, and I would prefer you to stay." Zara frowned. The lawyer said 6 months. The lawyer conveyed the minimum required by protocol. "I am offering more." "Why?" Hadrian was silent for a moment, and in the low light his eyes looked almost silver. "Because Victor was loyal, and his death was my failure to protect him. Because you should not have to raise his child in precarity, because I did not see the danger in time, and because he stopped, and something crossed his face that might have been frustration, or might have been something softer. Because I do not wish you to leave." Zara's heart did something complicated in her chest. "You don't even know me. I know that you have spent 2 days completing an inventory that most would have abandoned. I know that you have not wept in front of anyone since Victor died, though you have cause. I know that you are afraid, and you are managing it with a competence that is rare." He paused. "And I know that I had that nursery built because I could not bear the thought of you preparing for a child alone in a city where you have no family." She stared at him. "You said you built it because of protocol." "I built it because I wanted to. Protocol gave me the excuse." Zara's hands were shaking. She folded them in her lap and held on. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A role. Not as a steward that requires training you do not have, but as something adjacent. The court has a position called protector-in-law. It is an old term, mostly ceremonial now, but it grants the holder authority to speak for the household's human members and to mediate disputes that involve mortal interests. You would learn the codes, attend certain councils, and serve as a bridge. The position comes with residence, salary, and protection. Permanent, if you prove capable, and if I don't, then we revisit the arrangement in a year. But I do not think you will fail." Zara looked at the nursery, at the stars and the lamp, and the careful thought that had gone into every detail. She thought about London, about starting over with a newborn and no savings. She thought about Victor, who had loved this place, who had believed in the work. "I'll need time to decide," she said. Hadrian rose, smooth and silent, and inclined his head. "You have until the end of the week. If you wish to discuss it further, you need only send word." He left, and Zara sat in the rocking chair until dawn, thinking. She sent word 2 days later and was summoned to the 10th floor. The lift required a key, which a pale-skinned attendant provided with a small bow. The doors opened onto a hallway that looked like something out of a period film. Dark wood paneling, sconces that cast warm light, thick carpet that swallowed sound. A woman waited at the top, white-haired and elegant in a black dress that looked like it belonged to another century. "Mrs. Brennan," the woman said, her accent faintly Eastern European. "I am Isolde, the king's chamberlain. He is expecting you." Zara followed her down the hall, past closed doors and narrow side corridors to a set of double doors at the far end. Isolde knocked once and pushed them open. The room beyond was an office, but it was also a library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, packed with books in a dozen languages. A desk sat near the window, and Hadrian stood beside it, reading something on a tablet. He looked up as she entered and set the tablet aside. "Mrs. Brennan. Thank you for coming. Call me Zara, Mrs. Brennan makes me feel like I'm about to be fired." A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Zara, then." Isolde withdrew and closed the doors behind her. Hadrian gestured to a chair and Zara sat, grateful. Her back had been aching for days, and standing for long periods had become a challenge. "I've thought about your offer," Zara said. "I have questions. Ask, what does learning the codes actually involve? I'm not going to law school while I have a newborn. Nothing so formal. You would be taught by those who already know them, myself, Isolde, a few others. The codes are not written law. They are customs and protocols that have evolved over centuries. Much of it is practical. How to address a challenge without giving offense. How to mediate a grievance. How to identify when something falls under mortal jurisdiction and when it requires the court's involvement, and the council meetings. Twice a month, unless there is a crisis. You would attend as an observer initially, then with voice once you have sufficient grounding. The councils handle disputes, policy, and internal matters. Your role would be to ensure that human interests are considered and that mortal members of the household are not overlooked." Zara nodded slowly. "And protection? You said Victor died because of something internal." Hadrian's expression went cold, a stillness that was not quite anger but was certainly dangerous. "He did. The matter is being addressed, but it is not yet resolved. If you accept this role, you will be under my direct protection, which means that harm to you is harm to me. That is not a trivial claim in this court. Who would want to harm me?" He hesitated, and Zara saw the calculation behind his eyes, the weighing of what to say and what to withhold. There are factions within any court. Not all of them approve of human involvement in our affairs, and fewer still would welcome a mortal child in the royal wing. If I extend formal protection to you and your daughter, it will be seen as a statement. Some will accept it, others will not, and the ones who don't will challenge me or find themselves removed. But I will not lie to you, Zara. Accepting this role carries risk. It also carries my promise that I will not let harm come to you or your child. Zara looked at him, at the steel in his voice and the certainty in his posture. He meant it. She did not know why he meant it, but she believed him. "I want to accept," she said, "but I need one thing. Name it. I want to know why Victor died. Not the politics, not the factions. I want to know who killed him and why." Hadrian was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I will tell you when the matter is resolved. Not because I do not trust you, but because the knowledge is dangerous, and you are already at risk. Once it is settled, you will have the full accounting. You have my word." It was not the answer she wanted, but it was honest, and Zara had learned to value honesty. "All right, then I accept." Hadrian's face did something she had not seen before. It softened just slightly into something that might have been relief. "Then welcome to the household, Protector Brennan. We will begin your instruction tomorrow." The instruction was grueling. Isolde was her primary teacher, a woman who had served the court for over 2 centuries and who had no patience for vagueness. The codes were not written down, or rather, they were written in fragments, scattered across old letters and recorded conversations in memory, and learning them required listening, asking, and absorbing context until the shape of the system became clear. Zara spent her mornings in a small parlor on the 9th floor, reading case summaries and discussing hypothetical disputes with Isolde. She spent her afternoons with other members of the household, learning names and roles and the delicate web of relationships that held the court together. She met Lucien, the captain of the household guard, who was blunt and surprisingly funny. She met Theodora, who managed the court's finances and who looked at Zara with open skepticism until Zara asked a question about interest rates that made Theodora's face light up with reluctant approval. And she met Dimitri. Dimitri was Hadrian's cousin, a tall, elegant vampire with white blonde hair and a smile that did not reach his eyes. He was polite, formal, and utterly cold, and he made his position clear within 5 minutes of their first meeting. "A protector-in-law," he said, his tone light and poisonous. "How charming. I was not aware we were hosting a daycare." They were in one of the sitting rooms, part of a reception for a visiting delegation from Vienna. Zara had been introduced to a dozen people in quick succession, and her feet hurt, and she was too tired to be diplomatic. "We're not," Zara said, "but if you'd like a pacifier, I'm sure I can find one." Dimitri's smile froze. Across the room, Lucien made a choked noise that might have been a laugh. "You have a sharp tongue for someone so new," Dimitri said, "and you have opinions for someone who hasn't asked a single question. If you're curious about my role, I'm happy to explain it. If you're just here to sneer, I have better things to do." Dimitri stared at her for a beat, then turned and walked away. Isolde appeared at Zara's elbow a moment later, her expression carefully neutral. "That was unwise," Isolde murmured. "Probably. Is he always like that?" Dimitri believes that the court's traditions should remain unchanged, and he views human involvement as dilution. He is not alone in that belief, but he is the most vocal. You would do well to be cautious around him. Zara watched Dimitri across the room, holding court with a cluster of other vampires who looked equally unimpressed with her presence. Noted. That night, Hadrian came to her apartment. He knocked, waited for her to answer, and stepped inside only when she gestured him in. "I heard about your exchange with Dmitri," he said. Zara poured herself tea herbal, because caffeine made the baby restless, and sat down at the small kitchen table. "Did Isolde report me?" "Isolde does not report." Lucienne, however, found it extremely entertaining and told me immediately. Despite herself, Zara smiled. "He was being an ass, he was. But he is also dangerous, and you should not underestimate him." "I'm not. But I'm also not going to spend the next year tiptoeing around people who don't want me here. If I'm going to do this job, I need to be able to speak." Hadrian pulled out the other chair and sat, his movements precise and controlled. "I do not expect you to be silent. I expect you to be careful. Dimitri's faction is small but influential, and they are waiting for an excuse to challenge your presence. Why do they care this much? I'm just one person. You are not just one person. You are the protector-in-law, which means you have a voice in council and access to the household's inner workings. More than that, you are human, and you are visibly pregnant. To them, you represent a shift in priorities that they find intolerable." Zara set her tea down. "And what do I represent to you?" Hadrian looked at her, and the silence stretched long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Hope." Her heart did that complicated thing again, twisting and tightening in her chest. "That's a lot to put on one person, perhaps. But I have lived a long time, Zara, and I have rarely seen anyone face loss with the kind of strength you have shown. You could have left, you could have retreated, hidden, grieved in private, and let the world turn without you. Instead, you are here, learning a system that is foreign and difficult, preparing for a role that will not be easy. That is not nothing." Zara's eyes stung and she blinked hard. "I'm just doing what I have to do." "No, you are doing far more than that." He stood smooth and sudden. "I will not let Dmitri or anyone else harm you. But I need you to trust me enough to be cautious." "I trust you," Zara said, and realized as she said it that it was true. Hadrian's expression softened into something she was beginning to recognize. Relief, pleasure, something warm beneath the regal mask. "Good. Then rest. Tomorrow will be long." He left, and Zara sat at the table for a long time, drinking her tea and thinking about Hope. The baby was born on a cold morning in late February, 3 weeks ahead of schedule. Zara woke at 4 in the morning with contractions that felt like her entire torso was being squeezed in a vice. She made it to the bathroom, timed 3 more contractions, and then called the emergency line Isolde had given her. Isolde arrived in under 10 minutes, calm and efficient, and had Zara in a car and on the way to the private clinic the court used within 20. The clinic was tucked into a quiet street in Buda, staffed by human doctors who asked no questions and were paid extremely well for their discretion. Labor was long, painful, and exhausting. Zara had taken the prenatal classes, read the books, done the breathing exercises, and none of it prepared her for the reality of it. She screamed, swore, cried, and at one point told the midwife that she had changed her mind and would like to not do this after all. "Too late," the midwife said, not unkindly. "You're at 8 centimeters. We're finishing this." Isolde stayed the entire time, holding Zara's hand and murmuring encouragement in a low, steady voice. It was strange and comforting in equal measure, and Zara held on like a lifeline. The baby was born just after noon, small and red and screaming, and the midwife placed her on Zara's chest with a smile. "A girl," the midwife said. "Healthy and furious, congratulations." Zara looked down at her daughter, at the tiny scrunched face and the waving fists, and felt something crack open in her chest, something huge and terrifying and fiercer than anything she had ever felt before. "Hello," Zara whispered. "Hello, little one." The baby stopped screaming and blinked up at her, dark eyes unfocused and curious. Zara had chosen the name weeks ago, after long deliberation and a dozen discarded options. Something that worked in both English and Hungarian, something strong. "Liesel," Zara said. "Your name is Liesel." Hadrian came that evening after the sun had set and Zara had been moved to a recovery room. She was dozing, Liesel asleep in a bassinet beside the bed, when she heard the door open. She looked up and found him standing in the doorway holding a bouquet of white roses. "May I come in?" he asked. "Yes, please." He entered, set the roses on the side table, and looked down at the bassinet. His expression did something complicated, a flicker of wonder and caution, and something Zara could not quite name. "She is beautiful," Hadrian said quietly. "She's perfect." Zara shifted, wincing at the pull of stitches and sore muscles. "Do you want to hold her?" He looked startled. "Are you certain? I wouldn't offer if I wasn't." Hadrian reached into the bassinet, his movements slow and impossibly gentle, and lifted Liesel into his arms. The baby stirred, made a small noise, and then settled against his chest, her tiny hand curling against the fabric of his shirt. Zara watched him hold her daughter, this ancient, powerful creature cradling a newborn, with a care that made her throat tighten. He looked at Liesel the way people looked at miracles. "Thank you," Hadrian said, his voice rough, "for letting me be here. You're part of this. You have been since you built the nursery." He looked up at her, and the intensity in his eyes was almost too much to bear. I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. All right, I want to adopt Liesel formally by the court's laws. It is a right called bloodless kinship, and it would make her my legal daughter, entitled to the protections and privileges of my household. She would remain yours in every way that matters, but she would also be mine. I would be her father, not by blood but by oath. Zara's heart was pounding. Why? Because I have watched you for months now, and I have seen your strength and your stubbornness and your kindness. Because I helped build her nursery, and I cannot imagine this household without her in it. Because he stopped, and his jaw tightened. Because I am falling in love with you, Zara, and I do not know how to say it except plainly. I want to be part of your life. I want to be part of hers. I want to protect you both, not because protocol demands it, but because I cannot bear the thought of doing otherwise. Zara could not breathe. She looked at him, at the raw honesty in his face, and felt the world tilt. You barely know me, she said. I know enough. I know that you are brave and clever, and that you have built a place for yourself in a world that did not welcome you. I know that I think about you constantly, that I find excuses to see you, He broke off and shook his head. I am not asking you to love me in return, not yet. But I am asking you to let me stand beside you, to let me claim Liesel as my daughter and give her every protection I can offer, to let me try to be what you both need. Zara's eyes were burning. Hadrian, if this is too much, if I am overstepping, tell me. I will not press. It's not too much, Zara said, her voice shaking. It's terrifying and unexpected, and I don't know how to process it, but it's not too much. He waited, holding Liesel, his eyes locked on Zara's face. I need time, Zara said. I need to think about what this means, about what adoption would mean for her. But I care about you, more than I expected to, and I want you in her life, in our lives. Hadrian closed his eyes, and the relief on his face was so stark it made Zara's chest ache. Take all the time you need, I am not going anywhere. He stayed for another hour, holding Liesel and talking quietly with Zara about nothing in particular. When he left, Zara lay in the dark and tried to make sense of what had just happened. She had been a widow for 3 months. She had a newborn daughter and a job she was still learning, and a vampire king who had just told her he was in love with her. Her life had become completely surreal, and yet she could not imagine being anywhere else. The court's reaction to Liesel was mixed. Most of the household was cautiously welcoming. Lucien brought a stuffed wolf that was larger than the baby and grinned when Zara laughed. Theodora sent a card with a surprisingly generous monetary gift and a note that said, "For her education, start saving now." Isolde visited twice in the first week, bringing food and advice and a quiet, steady presence that Zara appreciated more than she could say. Mitri, unsurprisingly, was a problem. He did not visit, he did not send gifts. But word reached Zara through Isolde that he had spoken in council, arguing that a human child had no place in the royal wing and that allowing her to remain set a dangerous precedent. He is building a case, Isolde said, her tone neutral. He cannot challenge the king's authority directly, but he can make the situation uncomfortable enough that Hadrian might reconsider. Zara was sitting in the nursery nursing Liesel and trying not to feel the exhaustion that came with 3-hour sleep cycles. What kind of case? That a mortal child is a security risk, that she will grow up and leave, taking knowledge of the court with her, that her presence will encourage other human members of the household to expect similar accommodations, which will dilute the court's focus. That's absurd. It is also effective rhetoric. Dimitri is good at identifying fears and amplifying them. Zara looked down at Liesel, at the tiny, perfect face and the way her daughter's hand gripped her finger with surprising strength. What do I do? Learn the codes. Prove that you are not a risk but an asset. And trust that Hadrian will not allow harm to come to either of you. Zara nodded, but the fear sat heavy in her chest. Hadrian came every evening. He never stayed long, an hour, sometimes less, but he came. He held Liesel while Zara ate dinner or showered or simply sat and breathed. He brought books, soft blankets, a mobile for the crib that played a lullaby in a minor key. He asked about her day, about how she was healing, about whether she needed anything. He did not press about the adoption, and Zara was grateful. One night, when Liesel was 3 weeks old and finally sleeping for 4-hour stretches, Zara asked him about his family. They were in the nursery, the lamp casting soft light across the room. Hadrian was in the rocking chair, Liesel asleep against his chest, and Zara was curled on the floor with a pillow behind her back because sitting upright for too long still hurt. I was born in 1621, Hadrian said. In Transylvania, though the region was called something different then. I was the second son of a minor noble family, which meant I had education but no inheritance. I was turned when I was 26 during a border skirmish. The vampire who turned me thought I would make a useful soldier. For a time. Then I grew tired of fighting other people's wars and left. I spent a century wandering, learning, building alliances. I became king of this court in 1804 after the previous ruler was deposed for incompetence. How does someone depose a vampire king? Carefully, and with significant support from the court's elders. He shifted, adjusting Liesel in his arms. It was not bloodless, but it was necessary. The court was fracturing, and we needed stability. And you've been king ever since? Yes, it is not an easy role, but it is mine. Zara looked at him, at the way he held Liesel with such care, and felt something shift in her chest. Why did you never have children? I did not expect to want them. Vampires can sire or adopt, but it is rare. Our lives are long and the world changes quickly. A child vampire or human requires a commitment that many of us find difficult to sustain. He paused, his eyes on Liesel. I did not understand the appeal until I met you, until I saw you preparing for her, building a life despite loss, until I held her and realized that I wanted this. Not in the abstract, but specifically. You. Zara's throat was tight. You're making it very hard not to fall for you. Hadrian's head came up, his eyes locking on hers. Would that be so terrible? It would be complicated. Most worthwhile things are. She held his gaze, and the silence stretched between them, warm and heavy with promise. Then Liesel stirred and let out a small, querulous cry, and the moment broke. Zara laughed, shaky and relieved. She has excellent timing, she does. Hadrian stood and passed Liesel to her. I should go. Rest, Zara. I will see you tomorrow. He left, and Zara sat in the rocking chair, nursing her daughter and thinking about what it might mean to let herself love him. The next council meeting was a disaster. Zara attended as an observer, sitting in a chair along the wall while the vampires conducted business. The council chamber was on the 11th floor, a long room with a table that could seat 20, and walls hung with old maps and portraits. Hadrian sat at the head, Isolde at his right, and the rest of the council spread out along the sides. Dmitri was halfway down, seated with a cluster of vampires who all watched Zara with varying degrees of suspicion. The meeting started normally. Reports on finances, a dispute over territory boundaries, a request from the Vienna court for assistance with a rogue vampire. Zara took notes and stayed silent. As Isolde had instructed, then Dmitri spoke. I would like to raise a matter of concern, he said, his tone formal, regarding the protector-in-law and the child residing in the royal wing. Hadrian's expression did not change, but the room went very still. Proceed. I have the utmost respect for the protector-in-law's service, Dmitri said, his gaze flicking to Zara and then away. But I believe that housing a human child in the royal wing sets a precedent that could prove problematic. The child will grow, require education, and eventually leave to pursue a mortal life. At that point, she will carry knowledge of the court's inner workings into the human world, which poses a significant security risk. Liesel is 3 weeks old, Hadrian said, his voice cold. I fail to see how her eventual adulthood constitutes an immediate risk. The risk is not immediate, it is long-term, and if we do not address it now, we will find ourselves unable to do so later without significant disruption. What are you proposing? Dmitri folded his hands on the table. That the child be placed in alternative housing. Not abandoned, not cast out, but provided for in a residence outside the palace. The protector-in-law could visit, of course, but the child would not reside within the court's private quarters. Zara's hands clenched in her lap. She wanted to speak, to shout, to tell Dmitri exactly where he could shove his proposal, but Isolde had been clear. Observers did not speak unless called upon. Hadrian's face was a mask of ice. You are suggesting that I remove an infant from her mother. I am suggesting that we take reasonable precautions. Your proposal is noted and rejected. Hadrian's voice cut like a blade. Zara Brennan is under my direct protection, and she will remain in the royal wing as long as her mother chooses to stay. If you have concerns about security, bring them to me privately. Do not use a council session to issue veiled threats against a child. Dmitri's jaw tightened. I intended no threat. I am simply raising a concern shared by others in this court. Then let them raise it themselves. Hadrian looked around the table. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on this matter? Silence. Then we are finished. Meeting adjourned. The vampires filed out, murmuring among themselves. Dmitri left without looking at Zara, his expression smooth and unreadable. Hadrian waited until the room was empty, then crossed to where Zara sat, her hands still clenched in her lap. Are you all right? He asked quietly. No, I'm furious. Good. You should be. He was talking about taking Liesel away from me. He was posturing and he failed. Hadrian crouched beside her chair, his eyes level with hers. I told you that I would not let harm come to you or Liesel. I meant it. Dmitri can speak all he wants, but he has no authority to act. What if he tries anyway? Then he will answer to me, and that will not go well for him. Zara looked at him, at the steel in his voice and the certainty in his eyes, and felt some of the fear ease. I want to learn how to fight this. Not with violence, but with the codes. If I'm going to protect her, I need to understand the system well enough to use it. Hadrian's expression shifted into something that might have been pride. Then we will teach you. Starting tomorrow. The lessons intensified. Isolde drilled Zara on precedent, on the specific language used in formal challenges, on the ways that protocol could be twisted or honored depending on phrasing. Lucien taught her how to read a room, how to identify alliances and tensions before they became explicit. Theodora, surprisingly, taught her the financial levers, how resources flowed through the court, who depended on whom, and how money could be used to build loyalty or apply pressure. Zara absorbed it all, taking notes and asking questions and pushing herself to understand not just the what but the why. She attended every council meeting, watching and listening. She did not speak unless asked, but she paid attention to everything. Who sat with whom, who deferred and who challenged, the way Hadrian navigated disagreements with a combination of authority and careful diplomacy. Mitri, to his credit, did not push again. But he watched her, and Zara felt the weight of his gaze every time she entered the council chamber. Liesel, meanwhile, grew. She started sleeping longer at night, which meant Zara could think clearly again. She started smiling at 6 weeks, and Hadrian was there to see it. He came every evening without fail, and held Liesel while Zara worked through her notes or simply rested. She was falling for him, slowly, steadily, and completely. It was terrifying. She had been married, had loved Victor deeply, and the thought of opening herself to that kind of vulnerability again felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. But Hadrian was patient, never pressing, always there, and bit by bit Zara let herself believe that this could work. One night, when Liesel was 2 months old, Zara asked him about the adoption right. They were in the nursery, as they always were. Liesel was asleep in her cot, and Hadrian was reading a thick book in what looked like Old Hungarian while Zara folded laundry. "Tell me how it works," Zara said. Hadrian looked up, his expression careful. "The bloodless kinship rite?" "Yes." He set the book aside. "It is an old ceremony, rarely used now. The adopting parent speaks an oath in front of the court, claiming the child as their own and swearing to protect, provide, and guide them. The child's other parent, if living, must consent. Once the oath is given and accepted, the child is legally part of the adopting parent's line. They inherit rights, titles, and protections as if they were born into the family, and if I consent, Liesel becomes your daughter, your heir." "Yes." Zara sat down in the rocking chair, her hands folded in her lap. "Dmitri will challenge it, he will try. But the right is lawful, and once it is complete, he will have no grounds. A king's adopted heir is protected by every code and tradition we have. To harm her would be to challenge me directly, and that would require a formal duel, which he would lose. He would not survive it." Zara looked at him, at the calm certainty in his voice, and felt a shiver run down her spine. "You would kill him if he threatened Liesel?" "Yes." Without hesitation, she believed him. "When would we do the right?" "After she is weaned, traditionally. It is considered the threshold between infancy and childhood, and it allows the child to be part of the ceremony in a small way, but there is no strict timeline. We can wait as long as you need." Zara looked at Liesel, asleep and peaceful, and thought about what it would mean to bind her daughter to this world permanently. To give her a vampire king for a father, to raise her in a court where politics and power were woven into every interaction. It was not the life she had imagined. But it was also not a bad life. Liesel would be protected, educated, loved. She would grow up knowing strength and loyalty and how to navigate complexity. She would have Hadrian, who would move mountains for her if needed. And Zara would have him too. "I want to do it," Zara said. "When she's weaned, I want you to adopt her." Hadrian's eyes closed, and when he opened them again there was something raw in his expression, something almost vulnerable. "You are certain?" "I am." He stood and crossed to her, kneeling beside the rocking chair, so that his face was level with hers. "Thank you for trusting me with her, with both of you." Zara reached out and touched his face, her fingers brushing against his cool, smooth skin. "I love you. I don't know when it happened, but I do." Hadrian's breath caught. She did not think he needed to breathe, but he did it anyway, and then he leaned in and kissed her. It was slow and careful, a question and a promise all at once, and Zara kissed him back, pouring everything she could not say into the press of her lips against his. When they pulled apart, Hadrian rested his forehead against hers. "I love you. I have loved you since the day I saw you standing in that nursery, furious and grieving and refusing to break." Zara laughed, shaky and breathless. "That's very specific. I am a very specific person." She kissed him again, and this time it was not careful at all. The rite was performed 3 months later, when Liesel was 5 months old and had been fully weaned for 2 weeks. The court gathered in the great hall on the 11th floor, every vampire in the household present and dressed in formal attire. Zara wore a dress that Isolde had helped her choose, deep blue and elegant, and Liesel wore a white gown embroidered with silver thread. Hadrian stood at the front of the hall, dressed in black with a silver chain of office around his neck. He looked every inch the king, regal and commanding, and when his eyes met Zara's across the room, she saw the warmth beneath the formality. The ceremony was conducted in Hungarian and Latin old words that resonated in the high-ceilinged space. Hadrian spoke the oath clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "I, Hadrian Mircea, King of the Central European Court, do claim this child, Zara Brennan, as my daughter by bloodless kinship. I swear to protect her, to provide for her, to guide her in wisdom and strength. I swear that harm to her is harm to me, and that her place in this house is secure as long as I draw breath. This I swear by the old laws and the codes we hold sacred. He looked at Zara. Do you, Zara Brennan, consent to this bond? Zara's voice was steady. I do. Hadrian took Liesl from her arms, holding the baby carefully, and turned to face the assembled court. Witness and acknowledge, Liesl Brennan is my daughter, my heir, and under my protection. Let no one challenge this bond. The court responded in unison, a low murmur of acknowledgement that filled the hall, and then it was done. Dmitri stood near the back, his face a mask of cold fury. He did not speak, did not move, but Zara saw the moment he made his decision. The challenge came 2 weeks later. It was delivered formally in writing, and it named Hadrian as the challenge party. The grounds were vague: failure to uphold the court's traditions and a disregard for the counsel of his elders. But the intent was clear. Dmitri wanted the throne, or at least wanted to weaken Hadrian enough to make his own position secure. The duel was scheduled for the new moon, 3 weeks away. It would be conducted in the old way, with blades and ritual, and it would be to the death or to yield. Hadrian did not seem concerned. He is not strong enough to win, Hadrian said, sitting in Zara's apartment while Liesl played on a blanket at his feet. He knows this. The challenge is political, not martial. He hopes to make me look weak by forcing the duel, or to gain concessions in exchange for withdrawing. Will you give him concessions? Zara asked. No, he threatened Liesl by implication when he challenged me after the adoption rite. That I will not forgive. Zara felt cold. You're going to kill him if he does not yield, yes. She looked at Liesl, at her daughter's happy babbling, and felt the weight of what this world meant. I don't want her to grow up seeing violence. She will not. The duel will be conducted in private with only the council as witnesses. It is not a spectacle. Hadrian reached out and took Zara's hand. I know this is not easy, but I will not allow Dmitri to undermine her place here. Once he is gone, the rest of his faction will fall in line or leave. Either way, you and Liesl will be safe. Zara nodded, but the fear did not leave. The duel took place in the sub-basement. In a chamber that had been used for such things for over a century. Zara was not allowed to attend. It was a council matter, and she was not yet a full member, but Isolde came to her apartment afterward and told her what had happened. It was over quickly, Isolde said. Dmitri fought well, but Hadrian is older and stronger. Dmitri yielded after the first blood, and Hadrian accepted. He is alive, but he has been exiled from the court. He will not return. Zara closed her eyes and let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. It's really over? It is. Dmitri's faction has dispersed. Some have left the court entirely. Others have sworn renewed loyalty to Hadrian. There will be no further challenges to Liesl's status. And Hadrian, unharmed, he will be up shortly. Isolde left, and Zara sat in the nursery with Liesl waiting. When Hadrian arrived, he looked tired but whole. He came to Zara and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. It is finished, he said quietly. You are safe. She is safe. Zara held on to him, her face pressed against his chest, and let herself believe it. The months that followed were peaceful. Hadrian formally courted Zara by both human and vampire customs. He brought her flowers, took her to dinners in quiet restaurants where the staff did not ask questions, and spent every evening with her and Liesl. He taught Zara more about the court's history, introduced her to vampires from other regions, and made it clear to everyone that she was not just the protector-in-law but his partner. Liesl grew. She learned to sit up, to babble, to grab at everything within reach. Hadrian adored her, playing with her for hours and reading to her in languages she could not possibly understand but seemed to enjoy anyway. Zara's role in the court solidified. She mediated disputes, advised on human matters, and earned the respect of even the most skeptical council members. She was good at the work, and she found that she enjoyed it, the challenge of navigating complex problems, the satisfaction of helping people find solutions. And she fell more in love with Hadrian every day. One night, when Liesl was 9 months old, Hadrian asked Zara to marry him. They were in the nursery, as always. Liesl was asleep, and Zara was curled against Hadrian on the small sofa that Isolde had installed after deciding that the rocking chair was insufficient. I have a question, Hadrian said. You always have questions. This one is important. Zara looked up at him, and the seriousness in his expression made her heart skip. All right, will you marry me? She stared at him. Are you serious? Entirely. I love you. I love Liesl. I want to spend the rest of your life with you, and then I want you to decide whether you wish to be turned so that we can continue. But first I want to marry you. By human law and by vampire custom. I want there to be no doubt that you are mine and I am yours. Zara's eyes filled with tears. You're asking me to marry you in the nursery. I am asking you where we have spent nearly every evening for the last 9 months. It seemed appropriate. She laughed, shaky and breathless, and kissed him. Yes, of course, yes. Hadrian's relief was palpable. He He kissed her back, slow and deep, and when they finally pulled apart he was smiling a real unguarded smile that made him look younger. "I have a ring," he said. "I was going to present it formally, but I lost my nerve." "You? Lose your nerve? You are terrifying when you want to be." Zara laughed again and held out her hand. "Show me." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it. The ring inside was antique, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, delicate and beautiful. "It was my mother's," Hadrian said. "One of the few things I kept from my human life. I would like you to have it." Zara's throat was too tight to speak. She nodded, and Hadrian slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. They were married 6 weeks later in a quiet ceremony that combined human and vampire traditions. The wedding took place at sunset in the great hall on the 11th floor. The room was decorated with white roses and candles, and the guest list included the entire court as well as a handful of human friends Zara had kept in touch with over the years. Zara wore a simple white dress and carried a bouquet of roses. Liesel, dressed in a tiny white gown, was held by Isolde during the ceremony and was, according to Lucien, the most beautiful and well-behaved baby in the history of weddings. Hadrian wore black as always, and when Zara walked down the aisle toward him, the look on his face was worth every moment of fear and uncertainty that had led to this. They exchanged vows in English and Hungarian, promising love, loyalty, and partnership. Hadrian's voice was steady, and Zara's only shook slightly. When the officiant pronounced them married, Hadrian kissed her, and the court erupted in applause. The reception was lavish, with food and music and dancing that lasted until dawn. Liesel stayed awake for the first hour, charming everyone who held her, and then fell asleep in Hadrian's arms, content and safe. Zara danced with her husband, with Lucien, with Isolde, and with several council members who had once viewed her with suspicion and now offered genuine congratulations. She was exhausted and happy, and more certain than she had ever been that this was where she belonged. The question of turning came up a year later. Liesel was walking, talking in short sentences, and utterly fearless. She adored Hadrian, calling him Papa and demanding stories every night. Zara had taken on more responsibilities in the court, and the role of protector-in-law had expanded to include policy work that she found deeply satisfying. She was also acutely aware that she was aging, and Hadrian was not. They were in bed late at night when Zara brought it up. "I've been thinking about turning," she said. Hadrian, who had been reading, set the book aside immediately. "Tell me. I'm 32. I have maybe 50 years left if I'm lucky, and I don't want to spend the end of my life watching you stay young while I fall apart. But I also don't want to turn until Liesel is grown. I want to be human for her childhood, to age with her in a way that makes sense. That is reasonable. So I'm thinking 20 years, maybe 25. Turn me when Liesel is in her 20s and settled. That way I can be her mother the way she needs, and then I can be your wife the way I want to be. For centuries, if you'll have me." Hadrian pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her. "I will have you for as long as you will stay. 20 years, 25, whenever you are ready. I am not going anywhere." Zara rested her head against his chest, listening to the faint, slow beat of his heart. I love you, both of you, always." Liesel's first birthday fell on a cold evening in late February, exactly 1 year after her birth. The court threw a party, an actual party, with decorations and a cake and presents that were slightly overwhelming in their quantity. Liesel, delighted and overstimulated, ran from person to person, showing off her new toys and demanding to be picked up by everyone. Hadrian held her for most of the evening, clearly besotted, while Zara stood beside him and watched the court celebrate their daughter. Isolde approached with a glass of wine and a small smile. "She is thriving." "She is," Zara agreed. "Thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without you. You would have managed, but I am glad I could help." Isolde paused. "You have done well, Zara. The court respects you, and Liesel is loved. That is no small thing." Zara looked around the room at the vampires who had once been strangers and were now friends, at Lucien making Liesel giggle with an exaggerated story, at Hadrian holding their daughter with infinite care. "No," Zara said. "It's not." The party lasted until dawn. Liesel eventually fell asleep in Hadrian's arms, sticky with frosting and content. Zara walked beside them as they made their way back to the apartment, and when they stepped inside and Hadrian laid Liesel in her cot, Zara felt the kind of peace she had not known was possible. She stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching Hadrian adjust Liesel's blanket, and thought about the door that had opened a year ago. The door that had led to this. A family, a home, a future she had not imagined but could no longer picture living without. Hadrian joined her in the doorway, slipping an arm around her waist. "Happy birthday, Liesel," he murmured. Liesel stirred, made a small noise, and settled back into sleep. Zara leaned against Hadrian and smiled. "For our child," she said softly. "For our child," Hadrian agreed. "And for us, always." And in the quiet of the nursery, with the stars painted on the ceiling and the lamp glowing softly, Zara believed him. They had a future, Liesel, Hadrian, and Zara, built on loss and hope and love that had grown in the most unexpected of places. It was not the life she had planned, but it was the life she had chosen, and it was theirs, completely, perfectly, undeniably theirs. The door that had opened a year ago had led to this: safety, belonging, and a love that would carry them through centuries. Zara would age alongside Liesel, watching her daughter grow, and then when the time was right she would turn and join Hadrian in immortality, but that was decades away. For now she had this: a sleeping child, a husband who looked at her like she was a miracle, and a household that had become a family. Zara took Hadrian's hand, lacing her fingers through his, and together they stood in the doorway, watching Liesel sleep. The future stretched out before them, long and bright and full of promise, and Zara had never been more certain of anything in her life. This was home, this was family, this was love, and it was theirs, now and always.